Welcome to Chapter 8. Today's focus is 8.1%, sales tax and discounts. Today we're really just going to focus on the percent aspect. So as you can read through this first paragraph, one of the most common types of numbers that you hear on a daily basis is percent. But most people don't really have a good understanding of what percents really are and don't know how to compute needed percentages or percent changes. So for instance, if we look at this headline, Illinois lawmakers pass a 67% tax hike. What does that really mean? If the current tax rate is 3%, does that mean the new rate is 70%? I sure hope not, right? What does a 67% increase really mean? So today we're going to focus on percents, and we'll eventually get to this aspect as well later on. So before we do that, we need to talk about percents as a decimal and decimals as percents. So the word percent literally means per 100 or divided by 100 or out of 100. So how do we write the number as a percent? Well, we move the decimal 2 places to the right, and that's how we write the number as a percent. So for instance, if we take a look at these first examples here. So if we wanted to go from percent to a decimal, we now move 2 places to the left. Right? Correct, I should say. So if we have 45%, our decimal is there, we would move it 2 to the right. There's 1 and there's 2. So my decimal would go right there, and we have our final answer of 0.45. So what I want you to do is I want you to rewrite B as decimals and then come back and check how you did. So here's B, 4%, C is 232%, and D is 0.04%. So as you go through and you write each of these as decimals, let's see how you did. So moving the decimal 2 places to the left. That lends us with 0.04 for 4%. 232% becomes 2.32, and 0.04% becomes 0.0004. All right, if you have questions on that, let me know. Let's move on to the next. Now we want to write the decimals as percentages. So remember, this is where percents are really out of 100. So we're going to write the following decimals as fractions and then as percentages. Okay, so let's look at this first one, 0.35. Okay, so again, we move the decimal 2 places to the right. Okay, so there's 1, there's 2. So that's going to be our percent. So 35 over 100 is how we're going to write it as a ratio or as a fraction, and then as our percentage we would say 35%. So I want you to try B and C on your own and then come back and check. So you should have gotten 2.1% for B, because if we move the decimal 2 places to the right, I'm at 2.1 over 100, so that's 2.1%. Moving the decimal 2 places to the right in C, 1, 2, that means I need to add a 0. So we have 230 over 100, or 230%. So now what we're going to do is we're going to express a fraction or decimal as a percent. So let's move on to the next section. One thing to note to get into this is we're really just going to solve proportions. So we're going to get into some cross multiplying. But there's a little hint that we can use if we would like. We can make equivalent fractions by multiplying or dividing the numerator and denominator by the same number. So that's a little way to make things a little easier. But worst case scenario, we can just cross multiply and simplify from there. So if we look at number 3, we want to fill in the missing numerator and denominator on each of the following. Well, these are just proportions. So remember, with proportions, all we're going to do is cross multiply, right? So we cross multiply, and when we zoom in, we get 3 times 32 and is equal to 8 times x. And now we just go through and we solve this. We should get x equals 12. So I want you to quickly finish B and C, cross multiply, and see what you get for the x values. And this will lead us into actually finding equivalent fractions and percentages. Okay, hopefully you were able to do that relatively easily by cross multiplying. All right, and when you do, you should get x equals 15 for part B and x equals 8 for part C. If you have questions on that, let me know in class. So there are two ways to find percents or equivalent fractions that represent percents. Okay, so this first method is probably one that we're not as familiar with, but if we say A is a percent of B, then A is equal to P times B percent. We don't typically see it written that way. We typically see it written with method 2, where we have A over B is equal to X, which is the percent, over 100. I like to think about it as this is over of equals the percent over 100. Just setting up that equivalent proportion there, and it's much easier to kind of identify pieces. So let's look at these first examples in number 4. So it says use method 2 from above, use equivalent fractions to rewrite the following fractions as percentages. So in this first example for part 4, zooming in on A, all right, all we're going to do is we want to rewrite this as a percentage. All right, 5/8, 5 is what percent of 8, right? So we want to know what the percent is. So we just set it equal to x over 100, and we cross multiply and we solve. So 500 is equal to 8 times x, and we get 62.5 for x. So what percent is that? 62.5%. Okay? So I want you to go through and set up these proportions for B and C. All you're doing is setting each of them equal to x over 100, and then going from there and solving. Okay? So go ahead, cross multiply, and let's see what percentages you get. So for part B, cross multiplying, you get 200 equals 5x, so x is 40, but then we state our answer as 40%. For C, we get 200 equals 3x, so x is 66.67, and we rewrite it as 66.67%. Now we're going to get through and set up using method 2, that is over of equals a percent over 100, to solve the rest in example 5. Okay, so we need to set up a proportion, right? So part A says, what is 5% of 500? So it's this is over of equals the percent over 100. So the what is portion, that's what we're trying to find. That's our is, that's our x, okay? The 5%, that's our percent right there, okay? And then of, the of 500 portion is the of part, all right? And we get that. So those are how we set up our proportions. We need to identify what is the is, what is the of, what is the percent, and what are we trying to find. So now we've got our setup, and we can just cross multiply. 100 times x equals 500 times 5, and when we solve this, we should end up with 25. So 25 is 5% of 500. I want you to see if you can set up the next two on your own and then go through and solve them. So in part B, 31% of what number is 83.7? Okay, so can you identify the pieces? Hopefully we can identify the 31%, that's our percent. Of what? That's our unknown. Of what? That's our unknown. Is 83.7, that's our is portion right there. So go ahead, we can set that up, and we get 83.7 over x equals 31 over 100, and when we cross multiply and solve, we end up with x equals 270. Finally, try C on your own. 3 is what percent of 30? So what's the is, what's the of, what's the percent? All right, go ahead, set it up, and then let's check back. Hopefully you were able to recognize 3 is the is part, of is the 30, percent is unknown because it says what percent, and now we have our setup. So we cross multiply, we end up with x is 10. That's it for today. We will finish the notes for section 1 in the next video. If you have any questions, let me know.